What exactly does creativity mean to you?
Gosh, I suppose on a day-to-day basis, it's just thinking around problems and solving challenges, maybe not using the normal formulas, trying to kind of break down barriers. I suppose it's just really on a day-to-day basis trying to apply creative thinking so that you don't always follow the same line every time you're considering a problem or a challenge, particularly when it comes to communications. And just it's that horrible time-used phrase, isn't it? Thinking outside the box, and not just doing the same old thing for the sake of it.
Well, that phrase, thinking outside the box, I thought that was quite old-fashioned these days, because people say that when people come up with ideas that are out of the box, they're not very, very practical. You know, like they are not usually relevant, not useful, because they are outside the box, you know, so who's going to use them? And companies find that they're wasting a lot of time with people having ideas which are outside of the box, impractical ideas. What do you make of that?
I think it depends how big your box is. I think there's possibly some sense in that when you have free range thinking and you consider the idea that everything is possible, and then you have to sort of boil it back down into the practicalities of how you're actually going to implement a creative set of thoughts and achieve a goal. Because I guess it comes from establishing what your goal is and what you want the creative thinking to achieve. So if you think about, I guess, being creative in social media or being creative with content, you know, in today's world, because there's so much noise out there when it comes to kind of the digital and social noises that are out there, how do you find creative ways to reach people and interact with people? And we can't keep using the same old formulas in today's world because everything is a little bit more mashed up. So I think from my perspective as a PR and communications person, I'm looking for creativity in the way that we communicate, the channels that we use, the technology that we use, and maybe the visual aspects that we use, like infographics, and just find new ways to creatively reach out to people.
So there's two different things there, isn't there? One is about adapting to changes, adapting what already exists and creating something which is new but within the same field. And there's the other one, which is challenging the status quo. So sometimes when the status quo is challenged too much, those ideas don't sell because there isn't a market to buy those ideas that are just, you know, as we said earlier about being outside of the box. It's all well and good being outside the box, but who's going to pay for that idea if it's not practical? Same with challenging the status quo. Who is interested in that? Who is willing to pay for that? Do you think creativity, ideas and creativity have an intrinsic value, or are they only valuable when people are willing to pay for them in some way?
Well, it depends what you mean by pay, doesn't it? I think we're in the kind of well, I would hope more of a sharing economy, isn't it, where people will share thinking, and I suppose I feel that if there's a fear of failure in today's world that kind of stifles creativity, a fear of exposure, of doing the wrong thing, which I suppose is the other side of thinking outside the box, that if you don't get people moving on from that point of fear, if I try something new and it goes wrong, we will never develop this idea. So I suppose it's thinking outside the box is, as you've identified, is potentially old style thinking. But also, if you don't allow people the freedom to think outside the box, then you're going to create an element of fear that if they do, then it'll go wrong, and therefore why even bother? So,
well, that goes to the question of, like, is creativity individual or is it collaborative? Because an individual could have lots of ideas on their own, but they're not valuable to anyone apart from themselves, apart from the person who actually came up with those ideas. They're not really of interest in the bigger picture. So do you think that creativity is an individual thing, or should we be thinking of creativity as a shared experience?
I think that's a very interesting point, because I think from my perspective it absolutely has to be a shared experience. I think the impetus can come from what you might describe as highly creative, design orientated individuals, such as when you have marketing agencies and creative and design and advertising agency. You have the head of design, you have the head of creative, you have a creative director, and all roads lead to the creative department for the source of a creative idea. Well, that's all well and good, but creative ideas can come from any department, so therefore the act of collaboration kind of ensures that its creativity doesn't just sit with the creative silo inside an agency or an organisation. So collaboration absolutely has to be a force in order to liberate creativity and to make it work.
And then that's linked with the question of ownership. So in collaborative work, who gets recognised for the ideas, for the creativity? Who gets to own those ideas?
Only question, certainly in the world of digital advertising, PR agencies. On the one level, you'll have, say, a PR agency that potentially doesn't own the creative idea, that's owned by the advertising agency, but it might be the collaboration of the PR agency's ability to get the idea out there and to kind of, share the creative that kind of is the thing that makes it work at the end of the day. And again, likewise in organisations, isn't it? You have a creative department or a design department. They may come up with the original inkling of the idea, but then the idea gets developed and then implemented. So people are creative in the way they implement ideas and creative thinking. And I think it's so in my world, in social media, you have to be incredibly creative in picking the right channels and having the right creative tone of voice in order to get people to interact with you in a way that certainly you never used to have to before the days of social and digital. So there's as much creativity and collaboration and how you collaborate as there is in the actual idea.
Yes, yeah. And you pointed out this sharing, that nowadays we're living in a sharing economy. What exactly do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean in terms of online. There's so many resources are open source, and we're privileged that we can use these resources so freely to be creative. But there's a funding issue, because a lot of the resources that are collaborative, for example, Wikipedia is an excellent example of a creative resource which is totally funded by donations, but I get more and more messages from sources like that asking for donations because they've grown so big that they're not able to sustain themselves. So there's a question of funding, that if so much creativity is just widely shared, that are we really compensating the people who are giving their life and soul to develop those things? Are we compensating them adequately?
Potentially not, because we're not recognising the superb value that something like a Wikipedia delivers in terms of collating the world's information. Facebook have done extremely well, haven't they, for doing a similar sort of job by collating data and then reselling it back to us, and have made a huge business out of it, that sharing economy, because we share. I suppose in the world of, say, the press, The Guardian has made an incredible impact in the way that we can gain information and share information from a news value perspective, and yet The Guardian has not made money in many a long year and has made a loss, and yet all of its content is on a freemium basis. But it manages to thrive because people will give, or people will give it donations, whereas, say, the FT has got an enormous paywall and people have to pay for that content and that creativity in terms of writing or journalistic kind of content that they write.
So you mentioned, Facebook, you mentioned the FT. They make a lot of their money through the advertising, whereas Wikipedia, for example, doesn't advertise. So there's always that that balance of like, well, should Wikipedia change its policy and start advertising, start selling data in some way, or is it sustainable without having to do that?
Do you know that I don't know the answer to that question. I think it would. How do you? I mean, it's an incredibly creative place, isn't it? And it's come thus far and is seen as a global resource for a lot of information. And it has to have a sustainable future. And beyond the guy who set up Wikipedia, whether he sets up trust funds to keep it going, I don't know. But I think would the community of people that either edit Wikipedia posts and keep it going and are dedicated part of that kind of community and infrastructure, whether they would tolerate advertising is probably that they probably wouldn't. And maybe we as consumers of Wikipedia wouldn't tolerate advertising, but the question of how do you keep something that creative going just purely on the basis of the goodwill of the people that spend the time keeping the community up to date.
So why is it that people like yourself and myself who use both Facebook and Wikipedia, why are we willing to accept advertising on Facebook but not on Wikipedia?
I think it's a question of do we think, and I don't know the answer to this, I think potentially we think Wikipedia, because of its look and feel and its lack of creativity, actually, in terms of its look and feel, it's there, it does what it says on the tin, it gives you a whole bunch of really salient facts about whatever it is you're looking at, and it's nothing fancy, it's not creative in the way that it looks and feels, in the way that, say, Facebook is, and it would be very hard to see how advertising would fit into that kind of that infrastructure, that web interface. So maybe the way forward is if they've got is data selling, but that feels to me like it would go against the grain of the very values that Wikipedia was set up on. And I think that's perhaps the heart of it, is creatively it's set up on the Creative Commons license, isn't it? And that it's there to share, and that's what's at its heart, and that's what people like about it, because it has a ring of authenticity about it.
Yes, and so we have to think about the question of ethics. So is it possible to be creative and not be ethical? Is that possible?
So to be ethical and creative,
do they go hand in hand? So for me, when I think about creativity, for me, creativity it has to be ethical because it's about growth, it's about expansion. Whereas if something is not, if it isn't ethical, then it leads to destruction. It's not sustainable. So do you see things the same way, that creativity, it seems to have within itself intrinsically the values of ethics and sustainability, that for something to be truly creative, to sustain itself, there needs to be an ethical base to it?
I think people that have a natural core of creativity are always pretty much going to lean towards being ethical. Is that true? I don't know. That's a really hard question, Jesvir.
Yeah, it is hard, because you see, when we think about challenging the status quo, for some people, when a creative person, from their point of view, they're challenging the status quo, that can be seen to be quite destructive.
Oh yeah,
destructive. So yes, so it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is a difficult one. I think. Well, I guess it goes back to defining what we think creativity is. Is it art design? Is it those people that, can draw, or is it people who can communicate well? Creativity manifests itself in so many different ways, doesn't it? I mean, I'm a rubbish drawer, but I think I'm quite creative in the way that I seek ways to communicate. And I've worked around enough digital agencies and comms agencies and creative agencies to know that actually if you like I say, if you stranglehold creativity in the creative department, I just think that's outmoded. Creativity can come in so many different ways.
Yeah, like for example, Wikipedia is an example of creativity, because something exists now that didn't exist before.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary. And I think maybe I think there'd be many, many calls to action, wouldn't there? There'd be many, many campaigns to kind of, if Wikipedia was to close down, I think you'd get as many people galvanised to try and stop that from happening as, you would do if The Guardian disappeared, or other creative areas.
Yes.
It'd be interesting to look at kind of communities that have the hallmark of the success of Wikipedia and why it was successful, because it was made of and made by the people for the people. Yes. Very noble.
I think for me, another criterion of creativity that it needs to stand the test of time. So do you think, like in 100 years' time, will something like Wikipedia, will it still be around in 100 years' time?
Oh, yeah. I firmly believe that. I think it might be evolved quite dramatically, but I think people will always be hungry for the source of information and clarity on information and what things mean and why they mean it, and the history of why something became. I mean, the vast... I mean, I like spending time in Wikipedia just to validate certain things, facts, and so forth. And I know it gets manipulated and abused by, so-called governments and so forth to kind of manipulate facts. But I think it's probably one of the world's most trusted sources of information.
And what about Facebook? Do you think Facebook will still be around in 100 years' time? That's so interesting, isn't it? Will it be around? I think it will have evolved. It may well have burnt itself out. I don't think it'll exist in the same format, because are people becoming more and more wise to sharing how much information they share, and do we really want a massive corporate organisation like Facebook to know everything about us? Well, it seems that a growing number don't mind that, invasion of privacy and whatever. We are becoming more accustomed to sharing every little detail about our lives. With Google Earth, people can see what kind of roof tiles we've got, so they can see what we've got in our garden. So,
well, I suppose the beautiful thing about Facebook and others of its ilk, Snapchat or whatever your channel of choice is that it does allow collaboration, and it does allow creative collaboration, and maybe things that wouldn't have been created in an analog world have been created as a direct result of people across the globe being able to interact on a global level. So we have more connectivity with people in Africa, India, America, Southeast Asia, Australia than we ever have done in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can have a community and a chat with people all over the globe.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this.
Like this, yeah, wonderful.
And it's wonderful, actually.
Yeah.
And as far as teaching goes, you know, and all that e-learning that you can now do,
Yeah.
it's fairly sensational from a collaboration perspective.
Yes, it is.